Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we are talking about LGBTQ plus people and pagans and the overlap. We've talked about this several times. I've talked about it on my personal channel. It's a topic that keeps coming up, which says to me that it's kind of a big deal for us. This week's topic comes from JR, who says, I am a bisexual, cis-female, non-deist, and was recently talking to a gay cis-male friend about our beliefs. He commented that he thinks there are a disproportionate number of LGBTQ plus people who are pagan, or as he referred to me, pagan-esque. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think there are a disproportionate number of LGBTQ plus people in the pagan community, and or a disproportionate number of pagan people in the LGBTQ plus community? Why do you think that is or isn't so? Also, do you think that the queer pagan is a stereotype that exists? If so, what are your thoughts on the coupling of paganism with certain sexual orientations in the general public's view? So first, do I think there are a disproportionate number of one of these two things in the other? I don't really know what disproportionate would entail, because what are the proportions? What do we expect to be the proportion that we feel that it's disproportionate? Personally, of all the pagans that I know, I feel like there's kind of an equal distribution of homosexuals, heterosexuals, bisexuals, and all those other things in between. When I think of all the people in the LGBTQ plus community that I know, there's probably actually a smaller percentage of them that are pagan or that identify as pagan, but there are definitely a lot that I know, at least personally, who are non-Abrahamic believers. Sorry for the switch in locations. I ran out of room on my camera because I had a bunch of raw files of some t-shirt recon tutorials that are going to be on my personal channel that I had to take off the camera to have room for this. So sorry about that. Also, my roommate came home, so I moved into my room. So as I was saying, I feel like I know a lot of LGBT people who are non-pagan, but also a lot of them are not necessarily Abrahamic believers. But I do feel like within the pagans that I know in person, there tends to be a pretty good distribution of different sexual orientations. I think that can be greatly altered depending on where you are and what particular community you're in. I don't have exact statistics on it. That is something that I would love to touch on when I finish the pagan picture project that I've been working on, and then do just some simple surveys of the pagan community. I would love if we could reach pagans from all around the world and ask them some basic questions like that, like how do you identify as far as sexual orientation and all sorts of things like that. So those are just my views based on the reach that I have had so far and the people that I know. When I was in Arkansas, this came up actually when I was talking to the UCA pagan student group. They weren't all necessarily pagan, but they were part of this group. Some of them identified as non-religious or non-theistic, Satanist, or blended paths, all sorts of things. But so this topic came up, and I was talking to one of the students about how there is this stereotype that pagans are gay, or that there's a lot of gay people who are pagans, or a lot of pagans who are gay. And he was telling me his thoughts, which are basically, I think, what all of us have always said, which is that it kind of makes sense to us that there would be more LGBTQ plus individuals within the pagan community, because paganism as a whole is accepting of those sexual romantic lifestyles. It's not a religion that's going to put you down because of who you are in that respect, so that is a very welcoming aspect for people who do identify as sexualities other than hetero. It's not a requirement. It doesn't mean that all pagans are gay or not straight in some way, and it certainly doesn't mean that there aren't still LGBTQ people who are non-pagans or who are members of Abrahamic religions. But we sort of understand where the stereotype comes from because, well, it does make sense that people would be drawn to a faith that is welcoming of them in that way, especially when there are some other religions that are not. But it always depends on the individual. There are definitely people who still remain in those other religions while being LGBTQ, and there are heterosexuals absolutely in the pagan community, of course. So the next part of their question was, do you think that the queer pagan is a stereotype that exists? Yes, I think it exists as a stereotype, and yes, I think there are people who would fit that stereotype, certainly. No, I do not believe that it is indicative of all people who fit in the crossover of the LGBTQ plus and pagan communities that overlap, the queer pagan stereotype is not representative of all of those people. But yeah, I think the stereotype does exist. There are definitely people who experience that stereotype being used to try and define them. And that's part of why I started doing videos about LGBTQ pagans on my personal channel, because someone, if I remember correctly, it's been a little while, you can check out the videos. The first one I made was because of a hetero male pagan who was wondering why it is such a big stereotype that pagans are gay, because as a straight male pagan, he was finding that a lot of people, upon finding out that he was pagan, would then automatically assume that he was gay. And then there would be other people commenting and saying, like, that doesn't make any sense because paganism is so much about masculine and feminine, so it would make sense that the men in paganism would be straight and be very masculine. And the fact is that it's a huge spectrum, and I think we all know that. But it's not something that's evident to everyone outside of the community, and it's really not even something that's evident to everyone inside the community, to be honest. But yeah, so I think that that stereotype exists, and then they asked, if so, what are your thoughts on the coupling of paganism with certain sexual orientations in the general public's view? Again, as I said, I sort of understand where it's coming from. I can see the connections that are being made and why that stereotype came to be. However, I do not think that it is appropriately indicative or representative of the actual people who are members of these groups. And so something that I guess I would say to the general public on this topic is just, it's like anything. It's like any other stereotype. It's like any other time that you talk about religion and other aspects of a person's personality or character. There are certainly people who are going to be identified with both of these groups. There are going to be LGBTQ pagans. We exist. Like, we are here. I am one of you. I am one of them. But that's not the only part of the community. We are one part of the community. Not all pagans are LGBTQ. Not all LGBTQ people are pagan. You could say the same about any religion, anything. Really, it applies to so many things. It tends to be more evident to people when they are themselves a member of the group, because then they can say, well, yeah, sure, there's some I know because I'm part of the group, but I can also tell you more about the variation within that group. Paganism is a very wide range of beliefs, and it is, as a whole, welcoming to alternate sexualities. When I say alternate, I mean those that are not what is considered the majority by most of society. Paganism as a whole is welcoming to non-heterosexual lifestyles. That does not mean that every individual pagan is welcoming or is a member of those or a participant in those lifestyles. And that's not to say that the individuals who are not welcoming are not then pagan. They just have a different view than the rest of us. And when I say paganism as a whole, I am also speaking very generally. There are absolutely aspects of paganism and branches and traditions of paganism, religions that would fall under the pagan umbrella that in themselves may not be as welcoming to LGBTQ individuals as people think paganism as a whole is, and how I've just said paganism as a whole is. The things that we're discussing right now are spectrums, and nothing about either one of them is black or white. Sexuality is a very fluid spectrum, and so is what is considered pagan. But I think also, again, generally speaking, sexuality and sexual orientation and who you love, how many people you love, how you love them, those are not things that are dictated by pagan belief. Paganism and LGBTQ relationships and feelings and lifestyles and ideas and worldviews tend to go well together in a lot of cases, and that's why we see a lot of that overlap. But one does not necessitate the other, and they do not always occur together, I guess, is how we should think of it. I know that a lot of that sounded really vague and kind of mishmashed, I can't even say what I'm trying to say correctly, but I feel like that's part of talking about things like sexuality. It's not black and white, it's not cut and dry. There's going to be a lot of elements of there is this and there is not this, and it is this and it is not, back and forth, and it's all just something that you have to keep in mind, that isn't going to apply to an entire group, isn't going to apply to every individual in that group. And the more that you become familiar with these communities, you start to see more of the individual variation, and you start to have a better idea of the different things that really go on with that. The more you get to know pagans, the more you'll see greater variety in their sexual orientations. The more you get to know LGBTQ people, the more you'll see variation in their religious beliefs. So that's what I think about that. It does make sense to me that people put these things together, but it is a stereotype for a reason, and we can't always trust them to be true about everyone. Really quick before I go, I did try to look up LGBTQ pagans before I started this to see if there was anything that gave me a statistic, and while I didn't find that, I did find some interesting websites that I'm going to put in the description. Please check them out. Just to go through them really quick, there is an article from GayStarNews that is about paganism and LGBTQ individuals. Talks a little bit about some practices of different religious groups that, in the author's opinion, make them seem more welcoming to LGBTQ individuals, so to them it makes sense that that overlap exists with those. Basically just some good information in there and talking about androgynous deities and the play of masculine and feminine. Check out that article. There's also a Wikipedia page that is LGBT topics and Wicca specifically, which is another thing that I've talked about on my personal channel, so check that one out. And then there is a WitchVox page that lists what it calls gay pagans sites, so if you're interested in finding some of those websites that have been on the list for a couple years or as far back as 2001, check out that link. I also found a website called DailyStrength.org where there are subgroups for people to kind of use it as an online support group, and I thought this is really cool. There's one called LGBTQ Pagans. However, when I went on there, I noticed there are only 2 members of the group and there are no posts or pictures or discussions or anything, so I just thought if that's something that interests any of you at all, or if you're already a member of that site, I just thought that was kind of a cool thing, that that page exists for people to use, just no one happens to be using it right now. And then I also came across the LGBTQ page of the Pagan Federation London. So all of those links will be in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I will get out of your hair now. Until I see you next time, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye. Also, the announcement for new subs auditions has been posted. Please check that out if you're thinking about auditioning to be a substitute member for us. Follow the instructions there to find out how to do that.